In this series, based on the conversations I had while traveling with other creative and civic-minded young people, as well as others, on the Millennial Trains Project's 2013 journey, I've been examining how to motivate people to pressure American elected officials to make the investments necessary to move our passenger train network into the 21st century. I've asked about people's experiences with train travel and what influences how they choose to travel. While some are motivated by how enjoyable and eco-friendly train travel is, most simply consider the dollars and cents.
To the cross-country trip at some point, and the train seemed to eliminate a lot of the variables that you have to deal with when you are, the conventional way to do it is a road trip, but the train, you don't have to worry about gas, driving, fatigue, sitting in the same seat all day, so you can move around, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the stuff that comes with the sort of conventional road trip or cross-country road trip. So as a consumer, getting, on the Eastern Corridor between New York and DC, I've taken it a fair amount, and then traveling through Europe when I studied abroad, the train was one of the main ways of getting around over there.
Why have you had, before this, not really thought about trains much in the U.S. outside of the Northeast Corridor?
I feel like they seem to be relatively inconvenient. They only run a couple times a day, so you're limited as far as when you can leave and go between a lot of cities.
I took trains a lot through Europe. I did a Euro trip last year and took trains all around. And with my family, I've taken some trains in Europe. Again, I've taken a train across Canada. And took trains a lot around Northern California. I take the metro in DC all the time. Took the BART in San Francisco all the time. So
you hadn't thought about Amtrak as much of a viable mode of transportation?
I use the Amtrak actually to get to Baltimore from DC all the time. But mostly it's just expensive. I would take it to New York more often if it weren't so expensive. It's like investing in a flight, But from Seattle, it's not really a viable form of transportation. It's much easier to fly other places, but from DC to anywhere, I feel as though I could take an Amtrak.
It's worth pausing here to note that Amtrak fares per mile are higher on the Northeast Corridor than the rest of the country, simply due to supply and demand. Demand for travel in the densely packed corridor is such that capacity is constrained on all modes. And since trains are a desirable and trip-time competitive alternative to congested roads and airports, travelers will tend to prefer the train. In fact, Amtrak carries 69% of passengers between Washington, D.C. and New York who fly or take the train. But Amtrak owns the tracks on the Northeast Corridor, unlike the rest of the country, so it has to pay to maintain them. To add the track capacity and acquire the new cars and locomotives necessary to meet the demand would be a very expensive undertaking. Sadly, Amtrak is left to get by with table scraps compared to what highways and aviation get, and lacks a dedicated source of multi-year funding. This, combined with Congress's pressure on Amtrak to maximize passenger revenues, gives the railroad every incentive to charge the highest fares the market will bear.
So why did you choose the train rather than driving or flying for those trips you took in the past?
First and foremost, cost, I would say, was one of the deciding factors. But I took the train, most of the time I've taken the train ride to go visit family or with family, and having that experience where you're sort of all together. You can do that in a car, but it feels a little bit more constrained, I would say, in a car. An airplane usually serves to get you to a location where a train is part of the adventure. There are times where I have chosen to drive over the mountains to visit my family, which is a 2.5-hour drive versus a 4-hour train ride, where kind of time is more convenient than the experience. So I'd say that's the only time where I've really made the conscious decision where I had the option of train versus car.
I've traveled by train in India and Europe, but I've never done it between two cities in the United States. So there's a lot more to this trip than just traveling by train to me, but that was definitely something unusual.
And why have you so far not chosen to take a train in the U.S.?
I've just never thought to really. I lived in California, and 5 years, there did seem to be an option. I think that the expense of it was hard to justify not flying. So some of the train trips are more expensive than flying. Yeah.
And do you remember, there used to be a train to Louisville. Amtrak used to have a train from Chicago to Louisville.
I know. I wish they still did, because I'd go up to Chicago all the time. Maybe if ticket prices for flights keep going up, maybe then it'll become more affordable as well.
And would you have undertaken this trip or been as excited about it if it were a bus tour or if it were just flying from city to city?
Bus tour, definitely not. I've had my fair share of bus tours in high school, and definitely not something I would pursue ever again. Flying, I like airports, but logistically getting through airports every day would just be so cumbersome, and I wouldn't be as excited. Plus, you don't get to have as many human interactions along the way. Other than taking local trains in big cities, like I just took one off to Berkeley. Other than that, that's the only experience I've ever had.
You've never taken the train, the light rail or the commuter rail in Minneapolis? Or?
Oh yeah, plenty of times, just to get around. I usually take it to go see baseball games.
So that what about that makes sense as a travel choice for you?
For me, it saves money. Parking in the city for these events it's pretty expensive. The convenience of being able to get straight to the locations I want to in a fairly quick amount of time is also very attractive.
And then, but other times, like from Minneapolis to Chicago and other places where train is an option, but you chose not to take the train. Why did you not consider the train?
The biggest constraint for me would be time. I actually just was out in Chicago this past May, and I had the option of taking a train, but the fact that it would have taken 8 hours versus flying there in 45 minutes, it was a lot more attractive for me to fly out there instead of taking the 8 hours to Chicago. I guess it didn't really make a difference about seeing the landscape and experiencing the countryside, I guess. If they were to make trains so that, you have that modern feel with the Wi-Fi capability, you've got technology available on the train itself, that's something that would keep people using the trains. Because for me, whenever I travel somewhere a long distance, I'd always still like to be productive in some way. And so having that ability to just enjoy the ride, but while doing something productive with technology, I think is something big.
Taking trains because you can go to sleep on the train, and also sometimes you can save gas money as well. And that's about it.
What do you think it'll take to break the years of imbalance in funding where so much government money has gone into highways and not as much into trains?
What they probably can do is like occasionally they can give sales on the tickets, so it can make more people purchase the tickets to ride the train.
Yeah, Amtrak already does that, but actually Congress has put a limit on they can't sell a ticket for less than half off the regular fare because they make Amtrak maximize the amount of money they get from passengers. They don't have to get as much federal subsidy.
It sucks.
Yeah. Only basically ridden Amtrak between DC and New York. Why do you choose the train on that route?
The train on that route because the highway. Well, for one, I don't own a vehicle. I've given up having a car because it costs too much money and there's too much trouble involved with it. And then if I wanted to use a car to go to Philadelphia or New York, it would take forever, and the traffic on the interstate highway is hellacious, and so it's just much easier to use a train.
Why do you choose the train over the bus to New York?
Simplicity, more so. I've actually taken a bus to New York City, and every time I've taken it's always broken down. So the train you get on, you can just kind of go off in your own little world, do whatever work you need to do, and you get there.
And for other trips where you could have taken a train, because there's train service to many other destinations in the country, why do you choose not to take the train?
Usually because I don't know if, because there's no prior understanding that there is a train that goes to that location. So you immediately, when I think to go to Chicago, I immediately think to go by airplane. And in time is another piece to go to some of these farther destinations.
Did you know that there is an overnight train from DC to Chicago?
I didn't.
Would you consider that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why do you think a lot of people don't use trains, assuming they have trains available to them?
Because they're slow and the times aren't very good. There's not a lot of flexibility in timing. Yeah, I think if it became a more convenient option, people would be a lot more interested in promoting it and getting funding, and especially if it's high-speed rail. Having sort of a starting off point, like some of the lines we're working on from Chicago to St. Louis or Chicago to Detroit, that have like some segments of under 10 miles per hour, those will sort of like increase people's want for faster trains, or even faster trains than that. Cost, but also it's more convenient. People don't like to drive. Yeah, congestion. It's like takes longer. I don't know. It's stressful to drive in the city. You're always, I don't know. And then also, I mean, going back to the whole eco-friendly kind of thing. Like a lot of people, I think, in our generation want to use more eco-friendly ways of transportation and aren't dedicated to their car. And if they are going to use their car, they're going to try and carpool a lot more. But yeah, like trains or biking or anything that doesn't use as much gas or electricity or whatever, it's always a valid option.
Airplane travel is excellent, but there are those people, and I'm probably in that group, who would prefer to take a leisurely, well thought out, well planned trip and be able to enjoy that experience, because today airplane travel is no longer luxurious the way that it used to be.
Yeah.
And so in order to now come from the space that let's revitalize the era of travel that once was, is an excellent idea, and I might add an excellent opportunity. Although if you make it so expensive that only the elite can have that experience, then you've not addressed the problem, and you're really not going to come up with a solution to the problem. You're sort of compounding the problem that already exists.
The challenge is in connecting the limited travel choices Americans have today to the decades of policy decisions that made it the way it is, and to show people what's possible if we convince government decision makers to make changes.
I have always said that Amtrak is the smart child in the remedial class, and year after year we carry more and more people. And if you look at changing attitudes around car ownership, high-density development, the attractiveness of transit or travel alternatives, people want options, and this notion that somehow the utility that we experience on the highways and via air is somehow is a natural consequence of what people want, I think is false. It's the result of the political policies and the investment that has gone into those modes. So if you had that same kind of investment in intercity rail, you'd have a greater level of utility. And so the fact of the matter is, despite all the barriers to using Amtrak that exist now, more and more folks are using it. So that tells us something, and it says that people want options.
I'm Malcolm Kenton. I hope you'll join me for the next installments as I continue to find out what it will take to advance American funding for and policy towards passenger trains, so that people have more and better travel choices, the kind the citizens of the world's richest country deserve.